This week from Marvel Comics, Annihilation. New this week from Marvel Comics, Annihilation 2099, issue number 1, written by Steve Orlando, art by Ibrahim Roberson and Dale Eaglesham. Do you want to be in the video? If you're a longtime comic book fan, then you know the beautiful trauma of picking up a random one-shot from a familiar writer, or featuring a familiar character that you love, and randomly being assaulted by what feels like the coolest story you've ever read in your life. Once the aesthetic and contextual high begins to abate, you start to wonder, does anybody else know how cool this is? And more essentially, is this it? This can't be it, right? Like, we're gonna do more of this, right? The people have to band together and make this happen. And so, like the modern-day nerd Paul Revere, I have saddled up my horse to ride through the streets and byways of the comic book commonwealth to cry, Annihilation 2099! Annihilation 2099! Read it for the love of all the gods! This comic includes 2 stories in the rarely seen cosmic side of the 2099 universe, with The Last Nova and Dracula Risen, both written by Steve Orlando, who has written in the 2099 universe multiple times now. Also, Marvel has begun returning to this cult favorite 90s comic book timeline multiple times now with new titles, including a return to Spider-Man 2099 from creator Peter David. It's also an excellent series and proves the validity of fan interest in the far-flung, futuristic, more adult-oriented setting. The Last Nova chapter of Annihilation 2099 issue number 1 features one of the most exciting character developments in recent Marvel comics that makes me long for an entire series, including influences from several existing Marvel titles, showcasing Orlando's ability to artfully implement different facets of the Marvel Universe in exciting new ways. Specifically, I really enjoy when Marvel writers incorporate established concepts that we don't see often enough or weren't explored enough originally to a satisfying conclusion, as opposed to introducing an endless slew of original ideas and characters and concepts that only serve to make the Marvel comic book universe more overpopulated and confusing than it already is. Additionally, Dracula Risen in this book is an all-too-rare intentional exploration and evolution of Dracula in Marvel Comics, featuring a grandiose, frightening splash page of Dracula's awakening with the Tomb of Dracula font, which means that classic horror fans such as myself will most likely read this issue with their jaw on the floor like a ravenous cartoon wolf. Without further ado, let's talk more about Annihilation 2099, issue number 1, which means spoilers ahead. Issue number 1 begins with our as-yet-to-be-identified Last Nova, battle-scarred and kneeling in the gore-covered streets of Xandar, which was the home of the Nova Corps as he reflects on his creed to constantly defend peace and order in the galaxy. We then cut to the present, or futuristic, day as this Nova explores the planet Orn and the town of Shurgash, which is aesthetically and culturally designed like an old western. This Nova stop a thief from stealing from a fruit vendor, though the thief only stops out of fear, not respect for the mantle of Nova. And as this Nova wearily gets a drink at the bar, he gives us more insight into his backstory and the fate of Xandar, explaining that exoparasites from another dimension, having gained a taste for the Nova Force, descended upon that portion of the galaxy ravenously. And in order to repair wounds that this Nova suffered at the hands of the Hulk, this Nova underwent an experimental process to infuse the Nova Force into his literal cells, which inadvertently alerted the exoparasites to Xandar. As the Nova story continues, we get our first direct clue from Orlando as to this character's identity, as the man relays that his ability to heal allowed him to survive the exoparasites' onslaught and their infectious transformative properties, which made it necessary for him to bury the entire world. Holy shit. That might be one of the most badass things anyone's ever said. But Orlando doesn't fully give things away yet, as Nova's tale is interrupted by the arrival of a horrifying group of symbiotic raiders named the Null Set. Now, I know that I'm a Venom fan, so this might be biased, but the whole design of these raiders and the whole concept of a futuristic cult to Null with the devout catchphrase, "As the Dark Demands," is one of the most exhilarating pieces of Marvel lore that we've ever received. Nova makes short work of Captain Merc's cronies before going after Merc himself, who consumes the symbiotic flesh of his allies and their mounts in order to become a more perfect, hideous, death-obsessed entity. It is truly a battle of ideals, as Nova represents the last bastion of hope and survival in the universe, and Merc and the symbiotes representing eternal, consuming despair and death. Nevertheless, in a moment of distraction, Nova is impaled and consumed inside and out by Merc's spiky tendrils as he proclaims the inevitable victory of darkness. However, as Merc marches down the young fruit vendor, describing in detail how her parents were murdered, is caught off guard by the sensation of adamantium claws slicing through his neck. That's right, with the signature helmet of the Nova Corps removed, we see the face of Logan, aka the Wolverine, as he kneels beside the living corpse of Merc and incinerates him with the unleashed Nova Force. I cannot express how much I love that Orlando took a subtle approach for his use of Wolverine here, because it made the penultimate reveal all that more impactful, allowing for the concise themes of this issue to be layered on the character before we even knew who it was. Essentially, Orlando banked on the collective understanding and love for Wolverine's character to provide the added emotional weight and context of his story's climax, which is such an intelligent choice. A lesser writer would have certainly begun this story way more bluntly with something like, "Yeah, it's me, the friggin' Wolverine. I bet you're wondering how the hell I wandered all the way out here. Well, bub, it's a hell of a story." I hope that my fellow Marvel Comics fans can back me up here when I say I need to read more of this story. This works. This is canon now. Give me more, please. While Wolverine's turn as Nova handedly takes the spotlight here, I also have to give praise to the decidedly smaller issue Dracula Risen, which, as I mentioned previously, is a rare focus on one of Marvel's oldest and most engaging characters when written properly. In this issue, we see a typical pulp sci-fi crew of various aliens as they collect aboard a wayward vessel from outer space. The entire concept and imagery of this scene and what's to come is very reminiscent of the critically underrated B-horror Tobe Hooper movie Life Force, which I command you to seek out. Before the crew can even reckon what treasure they found, they are set upon by a swarm of bats that infect them with the blood of the elder vampire, thus submitting them to Dracula's will. In the aftermath, the damaged spaceship descends into the atmosphere of a nearby planet as Dracula informs his new thrall that any pain they suffer will only be temporary, for they will rise again as the immortal vampire. I should comment that this ending is very reminiscent of the late entry to the Friday the 13th franchise, Jason X, which I command you not to see. Please. While this entry is limited in its scope for the character, I'm just as enthralled as I was with The Last Nova by the potential for this new era of Dracula, set against the backdrop of an alien world and a futuristic society. And the story in this issue is true to the horror roots of the character in a way that we haven't seen from Marvel lately. In this first issue of Annihilation 2099, Steve Orlando and his talented team of evocative artists showcase their ability to synthesize bold new ideas for the Marvel comic book universe that could very well be the makings of cult favorite titles if allowed to develop further. Remember to support your local comic book store and grab Annihilation 2099 issue number 1 on shelves now. A while since I've been hooked by the first page like this. There's a page dedicated to concept art in the back of this issue, and I really do love the design of this Nova outfit. And look at this symbiote design. This is amazing. I love that Orlando took time to give us the backstory for every character involved in this issue, and it doesn't feel rushed. This is one of the coolest images I've seen. I've been saying it, we need more Dracula.